The waiter handed David my credit card back with a smile that didn't reach his eyes, and I knew something was wrong. David hadn't even blinked when the bill came to $300 for dinner. Most men I'd dated since Tom's death would have at least glanced at the total, maybe offered to split it. That's when I realized this whole romantic evening might not be as spontaneous as he'd made it seem. Where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments below and hit that like and subscribe button. Let me back up and explain how I got here, sitting in the most expensive restaurant in Chicago with a man who was either too generous for his own good or playing a game I didn't understand yet. 3 months earlier, I'd been standing in the produce section of Whole Foods, trying to decide between overpriced organic apples and regular ones that probably wouldn't kill me when someone bumped into my cart. "I'm so sorry," the voice said with just a hint of an accent. German, maybe. I looked up into the bluest eyes I'd seen since Tom's, attached to a man about my age with salt and pepper hair and the kind of smile that made you forget you were wearing yoga pants and no makeup. "No harm done," I said, suddenly very aware that I was 56 and hadn't been on a date in 2 years. "David Fisher," he said, extending his hand. "And I promise I'm usually more coordinated than this. Margaret Sullivan." Maggie. His handshake was firm, warm. Though I have to say, if you're going to crash into someone, the apple section is probably the safest place to do it. He laughed, a genuine sound that made something in my chest flutter that I'd thought was permanently broken. "Are you always this forgiving of clumsy strangers?" "Depends on the stranger," I found myself saying, which was not like me at all. The old Maggie would have smiled politely and moved on, but something about David made me want to keep talking. "Well, since I've already embarrassed myself, would you let me make it up to you with coffee? There's a great cafe next door." I should have said no. I should have finished my shopping and gone home to my empty house and my Netflix queue. Instead, I heard myself saying, "I'd like that." That coffee turned into dinner the following week. Dinner turned into walks along Lake Michigan. Walks turned into weekend trips to art museums and jazz clubs. For the first time since Tom's funeral, I felt alive again. David was everything Tom hadn't been. Spontaneous where Tom was cautious. Worldly where Tom was hometown comfortable. He spoke 4 languages, had lived in 6 countries, and owned an import business that seemed to require frequent travel, but also gave him flexible schedules. "I've been thinking about visiting my daughter in Germany," he mentioned one evening, as we walked through Grant Park. "Emma's studying abroad in Munich. I haven't seen her in months." "That must be hard," I said, thinking of my own daughter Sarah, who lived 2 states away and called every Sunday like clockwork. "It is." He stopped walking and turned to face me. "Maggie, I know this might sound crazy, but would you consider coming with me? Emma's been asking to meet you, and I think you'd love Munich in November." My first instinct was to say no. We'd only been dating 3 months. Meeting his daughter felt like a big step, maybe too big. But then I remembered what my therapist had said about taking chances, about not letting Tom's death be the end of my story. "I'd need to check my passport," I said. "Is that a yes?" "That's a yes." The smile that spread across his face was so bright it could have powered the street lamps. He pulled me into his arms right there on the sidewalk and kissed me like we were 20 years old instead of pushing 60. "You're going to love Emma," he said against my lips. "And she's going to love you." That was 6 weeks ago. Since then, David had handled all the travel arrangements, insisting on paying for everything despite my protests. "You're my guest," he'd say whenever I tried to contribute. "Let me take care of you." It was sweet, romantic even. So why did I feel like something was off? Maybe it was the way he'd deflected when I asked specific questions about his business, or how he never seemed to have mail delivered to his apartment, or the fact that in 3 months I'd never met any of his friends or even learned much about his life before Chicago. But tonight, watching him sign the dinner check without blinking at a number that would cover my grocery budget for a month, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was missing something important. "Nervous about the trip?" David asked, misreading my expression as we waited for the valet to bring his car. "A little," I admitted. "It's been a long time since I traveled anywhere that required a passport. Emma's going to be so excited to finally meet you. She's been planning our whole week." His hand found mine, warm and reassuring. "I think she's more nervous than you are, actually." "About meeting your girlfriend?" About meeting the woman who's made me happier than I've been in years. The way he said it made my heart skip, and I almost felt guilty for my earlier suspicions. This was David, sweet, thoughtful David, who brought me flowers every Friday and remembered that I liked my coffee with cream, but no sugar. What was wrong with me that I was looking for problems where none existed? The valet returned with David's BMW, another expensive detail I'd noticed, but tried not to think about. Import business must be better than I'd realized. So tomorrow night we'll be in Munich, David said as we drove back to my place. Are you ready for your first German adventure? Ready as I'll ever be. I squeezed his hand, pushing my doubts aside. What could possibly go wrong? Famous last words. As my mother used to say, if I'd known then what I know now, I would have gotten out of that car, gone inside my safe little house, and blocked David's number. But I didn't know. Not yet. The flight to Munich was smooth, which should have been my first clue that the universe was lulling me into a false sense of security. David held my hand during takeoff and pointed out landmarks when we began our descent. He was the perfect travel companion, attentive without being clingy, patient when I struggled with the German immigration forms. Nervous about meeting Emma? He asked as we collected our luggage. Terrified, I admitted. What if she doesn't like me? Impossible. He kissed my temple. But if it helps, she's probably more nervous than you are. The Munich airport was a maze of glass and steel, all efficient German design and travelers hurrying in 6 different directions. I tried to look confident and worldly, but honestly, I felt like what I was, a widow from Chicago who hadn't left the country in 15 years. There she is, David said, pointing toward the arrivals area. Emma Fisher was nothing like I'd expected. David's photos hadn't prepared me for how strikingly beautiful she was. Tall, blonde, with cheekbones that belonged on a magazine cover. She waved when she saw us, her smile bright and welcoming. Papa. She embraced David with genuine warmth before turning to me. And you must be Maggie. I've heard so much about you. Her English was perfect, with just the faintest trace of an accent. She hugged me too, which surprised me. Most 20-something kids were awkward around their parents' new relationships. It's wonderful to finally meet you, Emma. David talks about you constantly. All lies, I'm sure, she said with a laugh that reminded me of her father's. Come, let's get you to the apartment. You must be exhausted. The drive through Munich was like stepping into a fairy tale. Medieval architecture mixed with modern buildings. Everything clean and orderly in that distinctly German way. Emma kept up a steady stream of conversation, pointing out landmarks and asking about my flight. Papa said you're an interior designer, she asked, glancing at me in the rearview mirror. Was. I'm semi-retired now. Since Tom's death, work had lost its appeal. I had enough saved to be comfortable, and motivation was harder to come by these days. How wonderful that you have the freedom to travel now. Papa's been so excited about showing you Germany. Something in her tone made me look more closely at her expression in the mirror. Was that amusement in her eyes? I told myself I was imagining things. The apartment was in a beautiful building in the Schwabing district, all high ceilings and period details. Emma carried herself through the space like she owned it, which seemed odd for a college student studying abroad. This is incredible, I said, taking in the expensive furniture and original artwork. How does a student afford something like this? Emma and David exchanged a quick glance that I almost missed. Papa helps with expenses, Emma said smoothly. And I have roommates to split the cost. Roommates? Right. So where were they? I thought we'd have dinner in tonight, David said, hanging up our coats. Emma's made her famous sauerbraten. You cook? I asked Emma, trying to keep the conversation light despite the growing feeling that I was missing something. A woman of many talents, she said with that same bright smile. I hope you're hungry. Dinner was delicious, but I found myself watching Emma and David more than enjoying the food. They had an easy rapport that spoke of a close relationship, but there were moments, quick glances, shared smiles, that seemed to exclude me entirely, like they were sharing an inside joke I wasn't part of. The conversation flowed smoothly between English and German. David would translate when they switched languages, but I noticed he sometimes paused before explaining what Emma had said, as if he was editing. Emma was just saying how much she's looking forward to showing you the Christmas markets tomorrow, he said, after one particularly long exchange in German. But I'd caught enough words to know that wasn't what she'd said at all. Emma had mentioned something about the schedule and being ready. I excused myself to the bathroom and took the opportunity to really look around the apartment. The master bedroom was clearly occupied by a couple. Men's and women's clothes, 2 sets of toiletries. Either Emma had a live-in boyfriend David hadn't mentioned, or something else was going on. In the living room, I noticed family photos on the side table. Emma and David at various ages and locations, nothing unusual there. But in several of the photos, there was another woman. Dark-haired, elegant, always positioned between David and Emma like she belonged there. When I returned to dinner, I tested a theory. Emma, your mother must be proud of you studying abroad. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Emma's fork stopped halfway to her mouth, and David's wine glass froze in mid-air. My mother died when I was young, Emma said carefully. It's just been Papa and me for most of my life. I'm so sorry. David never mentioned. I looked at David, who was avoiding eye contact. I saw some photos in the living room with a woman who looked like she might be family. That was my stepmother, Ingrid, Emma said, her voice flat. She and Papa divorced last year. But David had told me he'd been single for 3 years. Another inconsistency to add to my growing list. After dinner, David suggested we all get some rest, but I was wide awake. Jet lag, I told myself, but really, it was the nagging feeling that nothing about this trip was what it seemed. David fell asleep quickly, but I lay in the unfamiliar bed, listening to the sounds of the German night and trying to make sense of the puzzle pieces that wouldn't fit together. The expensive lifestyle Emma couldn't really afford. The ex-wife David had never mentioned. The quick conversations in German that weren't being translated accurately. Around 2 in the morning, I heard voices from the kitchen, Emma and David speaking in rapid German. I slipped out of bed and crept to the doorway, staying in the shadows. I couldn't understand everything they were saying, but I caught enough words to make my blood run cold. Money, plan, American widow, rich target. And then Emma said something that made my heart stop. Sie ist perfekt, Papa. Reiche Witwe, keine Familie hier, viel Geld. She's perfect, Papa. Rich widow, no family here, lots of money. I backed away from the door on trembling legs, my mind racing. This wasn't a romantic trip to meet David's daughter. This was something else entirely, and I was the target. I barely slept that night, my mind cycling through every detail of the past 3 months with David, the expensive dinners he'd always paid for, the way he'd insisted on handling all our travel arrangements, how he'd asked so many questions about my finances, my family, my life insurance payout from Tom's death. Questions I'd answered honestly, because I thought I was falling in love. By morning, I'd made a decision. If David and Emma were planning some kind of con, I needed to understand exactly what I was dealing with. And I had one advantage they didn't know about. For the past 6 months, I'd been secretly taking German lessons. It had started as a surprise for David, something romantic to show how serious I was about our relationship. Now it might be the thing that saved my life. Guten Morgen, beautiful, David said, kissing my cheek as I pretended to wake up. Sleep well? Like a rock, I lied, forcing a smile. What's the plan for today? Emma's taking us to the Christmas markets, then dinner at her favorite restaurant. His eyes were bright with what I'd once thought was love, but now recognized might be something darker. You're going to love Munich. At breakfast, I played the part of the excited tourist while listening carefully to every German word exchanged between father and daughter. Emma mentioned something about der nächste Schritt, the next step. David responded with a comment about patience and timing. They were definitely planning something, and it was definitely involving me. I thought we might do some shopping today too, Emma said, switching to English when she noticed me listening. There are beautiful jewelry stores in the old town. Jewelry stores. Of course, the classic setup. Get the mark to a location where money changes hands, where attention might be distracted, where anything could happen. That sounds wonderful, I said, matching her enthusiasm. I love looking at jewelry, even if I can't afford much on my teacher's pension. Another lie. Tom's life insurance and my retirement savings meant I was quite comfortable, but I wanted to see how they'd react to the idea that I might not be as wealthy as they'd assumed. David's smile flickered for just a moment. Nonsense. You deserve to be spoiled. Throughout the morning at the Christmas markets, I noticed things I'd missed before. How Emma seemed to know exactly which vendors spoke English and which didn't. How she guided us away from crowded areas toward quieter sections where we were less likely to be overheard. How she and David kept checking their phones and exchanging meaningful looks. When we stopped for coffee, I excused myself to use the restroom and called my daughter Sarah from inside a locked stall. "Mom, aren't you supposed to be touring Germany right now?" "Listen carefully, honey. Don't ask questions. I need you to call my bank and put a travel alert on all my accounts. Tell them to flag any unusual activity and require secondary authentication for any withdrawals over $500. "Mom, you're scaring me. What's going on?" "I'm not sure yet, but I think David might not be who I thought he was. If something happens to me, if you can't reach me, I need you to call the police and tell them I was in Munich with David Fisher and his daughter Emma." "Should I call someone now? The embassy?" "Not yet. I don't have proof of anything, just suspicions, but I need you to be ready, okay? Mom, please just come home. Get on the next flight." The bathroom door opened and I heard Emma's voice calling my name. "I'll call you tonight," I whispered to Sarah and hung up. "There you are," Emma said when I emerged from the stall. Papa was getting worried. "Just checking in with my daughter. You know how kids worry." "Of course." Emma's smile was perfect, but her eyes were calculating. "Everything all right at home?" "Oh yes, just the usual. She's always worried about money, thinks I'm too trusting with my finances." Another test. I watched Emma's reaction carefully. Smart girl. There are so many people who take advantage of widows. The irony was so thick I almost choked on it. That afternoon's jewelry shopping trip confirmed my worst fears. Emma led us to a high-end store where she seemed to know the staff. The owner, a sophisticated German woman named Petra, greeted Emma like an old friend. "This is my father and his girlfriend from America," Emma said in German, not realizing I could understand. "The one I told you about." Petra's eyes lit up with understanding, and she immediately launched into a sales pitch about estate jewelry and investment pieces. "This ring," she said, showing me a stunning sapphire surrounded by diamonds, "would be perfect for a woman of your discernment. A wise investment as well as a beautiful piece. 25,000 euros. About $28,000. David squeezed my hand. "You should have it. It's perfect for you." "David, I couldn't possibly. Please, let me buy this for you. You deserve beautiful things." The pressure was subtle but unmistakable. Emma added her encouragement. Petra mentioned payment plans and financing options. All three of them were working together to get me to make a large purchase using my credit cards. That's when I understood the con. They weren't planning to rob me outright. They were planning to max out my credit cards on expensive purchases that could easily be returned or resold. Probably had done this before with other wealthy widows who thought they'd found love. "It's beautiful," I said, trying to look tempted. "But I never make big purchases without sleeping on it. Old habit." I saw frustration flash across Emma's face before she covered it with another smile. "Of course," David said. "Very sensible. We can come back tomorrow." But I noticed him exchange a look with Petra that suggested tomorrow might not be soon enough for whatever they were planning. That evening at dinner, I made my move. When Emma excused herself to the restroom, I leaned across the table and took David's hand. "I need to tell you something," I said, letting my voice shake slightly. "I haven't been completely honest with you." His entire body went alert. "What do you mean?" "About my finances. I know I've been casual about money, letting you pay for everything, but the truth is, I can afford to contribute more. A lot more." David's grip on my hand tightened. "Maggie, you don't need to." Tom's life insurance was substantial. $2 million plus his pension and our investments. I've been careful with it, but I think I'm ready to start enjoying life again. With you. The transformation in David's face was remarkable. The careful mask slipped just enough for me to see the calculation underneath, the greed that had probably been there all along. "That's wonderful, darling. You deserve to enjoy life." When Emma returned from the restroom, David leaned over and whispered something to her in German. I caught the words, 2 Millionen, 2 million, and saw Emma's eyes light up like Christmas morning. They thought they'd hit the jackpot. A lonely, trusting widow with $2 million and no one in Germany to protect her. What they didn't realize was that they'd just confessed to attempted fraud, and I'd understood every word. I spent another sleepless night planning my next move while David snored peacefully beside me. Every logical part of my brain said to run, call a taxi to the airport, get on the next flight home, and let the police sort it out later. But a deeper part of me, the part that had gotten me through Tom's death and starting over at 54, wanted answers. How long had they been planning this? How many other women had they targeted? And what exactly was their endgame? Over breakfast, Emma was unusually animated. I thought today we might visit Neuschwanstein Castle, she said, showing me pictures on her phone. It's only 2 hours by car, and the scenery is magnificent. 2 hours by car, away from Munich, away from crowds, away from anyone who might help me if things went wrong. That sounds amazing, I said, butter my roll with hands that only trembled slightly. Though I have to admit, all this rich food is catching up with me. I might need to find a pharmacy for some stomach medicine. Of course, David said immediately. We can stop on the way. But Emma had already pulled out her phone. I have something that will help, she said, producing a small bottle from her purse. German herbal remedy, much better than American medicine. She shook 2 pills into her palm. Take these with your coffee. You'll feel better in an hour. I stared at the pills. They looked innocuous enough. Small, white, unmarked. But every instinct I had was screaming not to put them in my mouth. Thank you, but I'm allergic to most herbal supplements, I lied. I'll just pick something up at a pharmacy. Emma's smile didn't waver, but her eyes hardened slightly. Are you sure? These are very gentle. I'm sure. But thank you for thinking of me. I pretended to slip the pills into my pocket while actually palming them. Later, in the bathroom, I wrapped them in tissue and tucked them into my cosmetics bag. If I was right about what they were, I might need them as evidence. The drive to Neuschwanstein Castle was beautiful and terrifying in equal measure. Emma drove while David played tour guide, pointing out landmarks and sharing stories about Bavarian history. To anyone watching, we looked like a happy family on vacation. But I noticed Emma taking several turns that didn't match the route shown on the GPS. When I mentioned it, she laughed it off. I know a scenic route, she said. Trust me. Trust. What a concept. As we climbed higher into the mountains, the roads became narrower and the traffic lighter. My phone signal dropped to 1 bar, then disappeared entirely. Perfect place for an accident or a medical emergency where help would be a long time coming. Pull over here, David said suddenly as we approached a scenic overlook. Maggie has to see this view. The overlook was deserted, just a small parking area carved into the mountainside with a spectacular view of the valley below, and a sheer drop that would be unsurvivable. It's breathtaking, I said, staying close to the car while David and Emma walked to the edge of the overlook. They stood together, looking down into the valley, and I heard Emma say something in German about making it look natural. That's when I knew for certain that this wasn't just a financial con. They were planning to kill me. My hands shook as I quietly opened the car door and felt around for Emma's purse, which she'd left on the driver's seat. Inside, I found her passport and felt my blood freeze. Emma Fischer, born Emma Richter, German citizen. But the birth date showed she was 29, not 24, as she'd claimed. And there were visa stamps for multiple countries: Thailand, Philippines, Mexico, Costa Rica, all popular retirement destinations for wealthy Americans. I photographed the passport with my phone while keeping one eye on David and Emma, who were still at the overlook discussing the perfect spot. Under the passport, I found something that made my stomach drop. A small vial of clear liquid and several more of those white pills, plus a syringe, still in its packaging. I pocketed the vial and syringe, then quickly returned Emma's purse to where I'd found it. "Maggie," David called, "come see this view." I walked toward them on legs that felt like water, very aware that we were alone on a mountain road with no cell service and no witnesses. "It's incredible," I said, stopping several feet back from the edge. "But I'm a little afraid of heights." "Don't worry," Emma said, moving closer to me. "The railing is very secure." She reached for my arm, ostensibly to guide me closer to the view. Instead, I stumbled backward, pretending to trip. "Oh, I'm so clumsy. Maybe we should head back to the car." David and Emma exchanged a frustrated look. Whatever they'd planned to do at the Overlook, my refusal to get close to the edge had ruined it. "Of course," David said smoothly. "We don't want you to be uncomfortable." But as we walked back to the car, I felt Emma close behind me. Too close. When I turned around, I caught her slipping something back into her jacket pocket. The drive to the castle was tense, though David and Emma kept up their cheerful tour guide chatter. I responded appropriately while my mind raced through escape scenarios. We were in a foreign country, in a remote location, with two people who clearly meant me harm. But I had evidence now. The pills, the liquid, the photos of Emma's passport. And most importantly, I had something they didn't know about. My understanding of German and the knowledge that they'd revealed their true intentions. When we finally reached Neuschwanstein Castle, I was almost dizzy with relief to see crowds of tourists and tour buses. Safety in numbers. "The tour starts in 20 minutes, Emma said, checking her phone. "Just enough time for coffee." She guided us to a small cafe near the entrance, away from the main crowd. I ordered coffee but didn't drink it, using the time to send a carefully worded text to Sarah that would look innocent if anyone saw it. "Having wonderful time at Fairy Tale Castle, taking so many pictures of everything interesting I see. Will send details when I get back. Love you." It was code, I hoped. Sarah was smart enough to understand that I wouldn't normally text like that, and the phrase about pictures and details would tell her to expect evidence if something happened to me. "Shall we go in?" David asked when our coffee cups were empty. The castle tour was a 2-hour ordeal of trying to look fascinated by King Ludwig's bedroom while planning my escape. Emma stayed close beside me the entire time, occasionally touching my arm or back in gestures that might have looked affectionate but felt threatening. During the tour, I overheard her speaking German to what appeared to be another tourist, a man in his 40s who seemed to know her. They spoke in low, urgent tones, and I caught enough to understand they were discussing timing and opportunities. How many people were part of this operation? As we exited the castle, Emma suggested one final stop at a gift shop tucked away from the main tourist area. "They have beautiful scarves," she said. "Perfect souvenirs." The shop was small, dimly lit, and nearly empty. The elderly proprietor barely looked up when we entered. Emma immediately began showing me scarves near the back of the store, away from the windows and the door. That's when David moved to block the exit. I was trapped, and they knew it. "This one is lovely," Emma said, holding up a silk scarf in deep blue. "Try it on." But instead of draping it around my neck like a normal scarf, she moved to wrap it tight around my throat. I grabbed her wrists and looked directly into her eyes. "Es tut mir leid, Emma," I said clearly in German. "Aber ich verstehe alles." "I'm sorry, Emma, but I understand everything." The color drained from her face as she realized their American mark had been playing them all along. The shock on Emma's face was almost worth the terror of the moment. She dropped the scarf and took a step back, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. "You speak German?" David's voice came from behind me, no longer warm and loving but cold and calculating. "Enough," I said, turning to face him while keeping Emma in my peripheral vision. "Enough to know you've been planning to rob me, or worse." The elderly shop owner looked up from his register with mild interest, as if customers threatening each other was a daily occurrence. No help there. David moved closer, and I saw his hand slip into his jacket pocket. "Maggie, I think there's been a misunderstanding." "Really?" "Because I understood perfectly when Emma told you I was the perfect target. Rich widow, no family here. Lots of money. That was pretty clear." Emma had recovered from her shock and was circling around to my other side. In a few seconds, I'd be trapped between them with nowhere to run. "You clever little mouse," she said, her accent thicker now, her English less polished. But not clever enough. That's when I pulled out my phone and hit play on a voice recording app I'd started when we entered the shop. "You were saying something about me being clever?" I asked loudly. "Please, continue. Tell me more about your plan." David lunged for my phone, but I was already moving, grabbing a heavy ceramic vase from a nearby shelf and swinging it toward his head. It connected with a satisfying crack, and he stumbled backward. Emma reached for me, but I was ready. 2 years of grief therapy had included some anger management sessions that involved kickboxing. I might be 56, but I was in better shape than most people half my age. My elbow connected with Emma's solar plexus, doubling her over. I ran for the door, shouting in German for help as loudly as I could. Hilfe! Sie versuchen mich zu berauben! Help! They're trying to rob me! The street outside was busy with tourists heading back to their buses. Several people turned at my shouting, and I saw a police officer near the parking area. Polizei! I screamed, running toward him. Hilfe! Behind me, I could hear David and Emma emerging from the shop. Emma was shouting something about a crazy American tourist trying to control the narrative, but I was already reaching the officer. Sprechen Sie English? I gasped. Do you speak English? Yes, of course. What is the problem? Those two people. I pointed at David and Emma, who had stopped pursuing me when they saw the police officer. They've been trying to rob me. They brought me here to hurt me. The officer looked skeptical. You are tourists together, no? I thought we were, but they've been planning this for months. I pulled out my phone. I have evidence, photos, recordings. Emma had approached us now, her face a mask of concern. Officer, I'm so sorry. My stepmother has been having episodes lately. Confusion, paranoia. We're trying to get her to see a doctor. Stepmother. Clever. It explained why we were traveling together, but also gave them an excuse for any erratic behavior on my part. She's lying, I said firmly. My name is Margaret Sullivan. I'm an American citizen, and these people have been planning to rob me. Check my passport. Check theirs. She told me she was 24, but her passport says she's 29. The officer looked between us uncertainly. David stepped forward with his most charming smile. Officer, I apologize for the disturbance. My girlfriend has been under a lot of stress lately, and I think the travel has been too much for her. He spoke with the authority of a man accustomed to being believed. Perhaps you could recommend a doctor who speaks English? I could see the officer being swayed. 3 Americans having a family dispute wasn't high on his priority list, and David's calm, reasonable demeanor was more convincing than my frantic accusations. I need to make a phone call, I said quickly, to the American embassy. Of course, the officer said, but perhaps it would be better to resolve this quietly. No? Return to your hotel, rest, talk with your family. David nodded eagerly. Exactly what I was thinking. Thank you, officer. But as we walked back toward Emma's car, I realized I'd just made a terrible mistake. I'd revealed that I knew their plan, but I hadn't gotten away from them. Now they knew I was a threat, and they'd be desperate to silence me. Get in the car, Maggie, David said quietly. His hand was back in his pocket, and I was sure he had a weapon. I think I'd prefer to take the bus back to Munich, I said. I don't think that's an option anymore, Emma said, opening the car door. Please don't make this harder than it has to be. The bus was already pulling away, taking my last chance at safety with it. The police officer had moved on to other tourists. We were alone again. I got in the car because I didn't see another choice, but my mind was racing. They couldn't kill me at the castle. Too many witnesses, too much scrutiny. But during the 2-hour drive back to Munich, on those winding mountain roads with no cell service, that was a different story. As Emma started the engine, I noticed she was taking a different route than we'd used that morning. David had twisted around in the passenger seat to watch me, his friendly facade completely gone. You know, Maggie, he said conversationally, you really should have just enjoyed the vacation. We were planning to make it quick and painless. Were you? Or was I supposed to have an accident on that overlook this morning? Emma laughed, but there was no humor in it. You're smarter than our usual marks. Most of them never figure it out until it's too late. How many others have there been? Enough, David said. Lonely widows are surprisingly easy to find. Dating websites, grief support groups, church socials, they all want the same thing. Someone to take care of them, someone to make them feel special again. The casual cruelty of it made me sick. And you kill them all? Only when necessary, Emma said, taking a turn onto an even narrower road. Usually they're so grateful for attention that they hand over their money willingly. You, however, have become a problem. I looked out the window, trying to memorize landmarks, anything that might help me later. The road was climbing again, winding through dense forest with steep drops on one side. Perfect place for a car accident. My phone buzzed with a text message, and I saw both David and Emma tense. Don't answer it, David warned. But I could see the message preview on my lock screen. It was from Sarah. Mom, I'm worried. Called embassy. They're expecting to hear from you by 6 p.m. local time, or they're sending someone to check on you. I'd never been so grateful for my daughter's overprotective nature in my life. That's my daughter, I said calmly. She knows exactly where I am and who I'm with. If something happens to me, the American embassy will come looking. Emma cursed in German and pulled the car over to the side of the road. We were in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by forest, with daylight fading fast. This complicates things, David said. Not really, Emma replied. We just need to speed up our timeline. She reached into the glove compartment and pulled out a syringe, the same type I'd seen in her purse earlier. What is that? I asked, though I was pretty sure I didn't want to know. Something to make you more cooperative, Emma said, checking the contents of the syringe. Don't worry, you won't feel anything after the first few seconds. That's when I realized I had one last card to play, the evidence I'd hidden in my cosmetics bag back at the apartment. Before you do that, I said, you should know I've already sent everything to my daughter. The photos of your passport, recordings of your conversations, even samples of those pills you tried to give me this morning. Emma's hand stilled. You're lying. Am I? Check your purse. Are all those pills still there? Emma frantically searched her purse while David grabbed my phone, scrolling through my messages and photos. She's telling the truth, he said grimly. She took pictures of everything. Then we have a bigger problem than just her, Emma said. If she sent evidence to someone else, we can't let her make that 6 o'clock call, David said. But I was already moving, grabbing the door handle and throwing myself out of the car into the forest beyond. Behind me, I heard Emma shouting and car doors slamming, but I was already running deeper into the woods, hoping against hope that I could find help before they found me. The hunt was on, and I was the prey. But for the first time since this nightmare began, I had something they didn't expect, a head start, evidence that was already safe, and the knowledge that people were looking for me. Now I just had to stay alive long enough to be found. Running through a German forest in November while being chased by murderous con artists wasn't exactly how I'd imagined spending my golden years. The smart thing would have been to stay on the cruise ship circuit like other sensible widows, comparing prescription medications and complaining about the buffet lines. But here I was, crashing through underbrush in my good travel shoes, trying not to think about how many true crime documentaries started exactly this way. Behind me, I could hear David and Emma calling my name, their voices echoing through the trees. They were trying to sound concerned, like worried family members searching for a confused elderly relative. Smart approach. If anyone else was in these woods, it would look like a rescue operation rather than a manhunt. Maggie, where are you? We're worried about you. Worried about me escaping, more like it. I kept moving deeper into the forest, staying away from any paths that might lead me back toward the road. My phone still had no signal, but I kept checking, hoping for even one bar that might let me send a message. The woods were getting darker as the sun set, and the temperature was dropping fast. I was dressed for castle touring, not wilderness survival. My lightweight jacket wouldn't keep me warm for long, and my ankle boots weren't designed for hiking over fallen logs and rocky ground. But I was alive, and that was more than David and Emma had planned for me. I found a hollow under a large fallen tree and crawled inside to catch my breath. From my hiding spot, I could still hear them searching, but their voices were getting fainter. Either they were moving away from me, or they were getting better at keeping quiet. Neither option was particularly comforting. I pulled out my phone again and checked the time. 5:47 p.m. 13 minutes until Sarah expected to hear from me. If I missed that deadline, the embassy would start looking. But how long would it take them to find me? And would I still be alive when they did? That's when I heard the voices again. Much closer this time. She can't have gone far, Emma was saying in German. An American tourist in hiking boots? She'll be heading back toward the road within an hour. Unless she's smarter than we thought, David replied. She's already proven she's more observant than our usual targets. It doesn't matter how smart she is. She's trapped in the woods with no cell service and no idea where she is. We just need to be patient. Patient. They were planning to wait me out, knowing I'd have to come back eventually for food, warmth, or shelter. But they were wrong about one thing. I did know where I was. Sort of. During the drive, I'd been paying attention to road signs and landmarks, partly from habit and partly because something about this whole trip had felt wrong from the beginning. We were somewhere near Oberammergau in the Bavarian Alps, tourist area, which meant there would be hiking trails, mountain huts, maybe even a village if I could figure out which direction to go. I waited until their voices faded again, then carefully emerged from my hiding spot. The forest was almost completely dark now, but there was enough moonlight filtering through the bare branches to see a few feet ahead. I started moving parallel to where I thought the road was, hoping to find a trail marker or some other sign of civilization. My feet were already starting to hurt, and I was getting hungry, but those were minor concerns compared to staying alive. 20 minutes later, I heard something that made my heart leap. The sound of a car engine. Not Emma's car, but something heavier, like a truck or SUV. I moved as quickly as I dared toward the sound. Emerging from the tree line, just as a German Forestry Service vehicle drove past on a narrow dirt road I hadn't known existed. I ran into the road, waving my arms and shouting in German, "Hilfe! Bitte helfen Sie mir!" The truck stopped, and a man in uniform got out. He looked to be in his 30s, with the kind of calm competence you'd want in an emergency situation. Was es passiert? What happened? "I'm American," I said, switching to English. "There are people trying to hurt me. Please, I need to call the police." He studied my face for a moment, probably trying to decide if I was a genuine victim or just another confused tourist. My torn jacket and the scratches on my hands from running through the woods must have been convincing evidence. "Get in," he said in accented English. "I will take you to the station." I climbed into the passenger seat, almost crying with relief. For the first time in hours, I felt safe. "My name is Klaus Muller," he said as we drove. "I am forest ranger here. You said someone is trying to hurt you?" I gave him the abbreviated version. American tourist, boyfriend, and his daughter planned to rob me, chased me into the woods. I didn't mention the murder attempt or the syringe. That could wait for the police. "Where are they now?" Klaus asked. "Still looking for me, I think. They had a car, blue BMW with Munich plates." I tried to remember the license number but came up blank. Klaus radioed something to his headquarters in rapid German, then looked at his watch. "Police will meet us at the ranger station. 10 minutes. 10 minutes. I could survive 10 more minutes. But as we rounded a bend in the road, Klaus suddenly hit the brakes. Emma's BMW was parked sideways across the narrow road, blocking our path. "That's them," I whispered. Klaus immediately put the truck in reverse, but it was too late. David appeared at the driver's side window with what looked like a gun, while Emma approached from my side. "Turn off the engine," David said calmly, "and both of you get out slowly." Klaus looked at me apologetically. "I am sorry. I should have been more careful." "It's not your fault," I said. "They've been planning this for months." We climbed out of the truck with our hands visible. Emma was holding that syringe again, and her smile was pure predator. "Hello again, stepmother," she said. "Ready to come home now?" But what they didn't know was that Klaus's radio call had already gone through. Help was coming, even if it might be too late for us. David gestured with his gun toward their car. "Everyone in the BMW. We're going to take a little drive." "Where?" Klaus asked. "Somewhere quieter," Emma said. "Somewhere we can have a family discussion without interruption." As we walked toward their car, I caught Klaus's eye and mouthed 2 words in German. "10 Minuten." 10 minutes. He gave an almost imperceptible nod. He understood. We just had to stay alive for 10 more minutes. The BMW felt like a mobile coffin as Emma drove us deeper into the mountains. Klaus and I were in the back seat with David pointing his gun at us from the front passenger seat. Professional to the end, David had zip-tied our hands behind our backs. Apparently, they came prepared for multiple hostages. I had to admire their thoroughness, even while planning their demise. "So, Klaus," David said conversationally, "bad luck running into us tonight. Wrong place, wrong time." Klaus said nothing, but I could feel the tension radiating from him. He was probably calculating distances and angles, looking for an opportunity to act. Good. I needed him focused, not panicked. "Where are we going?" I asked. "Somewhere private," Emma said, taking another turn onto an even narrower road. "Papa has a special place he likes to use for difficult conversations." Papa. Even now, she was still playing the devoted daughter role. I wondered if that was genuine, or just part of their cover story. "How long have you two been doing this?" I asked. "The widow hunting, I mean." David chuckled. "Longer than you might think. Emma's been my partner for almost 8 years now." "Partner in what sense?" The question slipped out before I could stop it. Emma met my eyes in the rearview mirror, and her smile was pure malice. What do you think, Maggie? The implication hit me like a physical blow. David and Emma weren't just father and daughter working together. They were lovers posing as family members. The whole father-daughter dynamic was just another layer of their con. You're sick, I said. We're practical, David corrected. The father-daughter cover story works perfectly. Targets trust family relationships. It explains why we're together, why we travel together, why we know each other so well. And it's so much more convincing than the usual romantic partner approach, Emma added. Marks get suspicious of new boyfriends with beautiful young girlfriends. But a devoted daughter, that's just sweet. Klaus was listening intently, and I hoped he was memorizing every word for the police report he'd hopefully live to give. The car turned into what looked like an abandoned logging road, barely wide enough for one vehicle. Tree branches scraped against the windows as we climbed higher into the mountains. Almost there, Emma announced cheerfully. What exactly happens when we get there? I asked, though I was pretty sure I didn't want to know. We have a conversation, David said, about your bank accounts, your credit cards, your financial passwords, everything you've been so reluctant to share. And then? Then you and Klaus have an unfortunate hiking accident. Very tragic. 2 tourists who got lost in the woods fell down a ravine in the dark. Klaus spoke for the first time since we'd gotten in the car. People know where I am. My supervisor, the police, they will search. Of course they will, Emma said. And eventually they'll find your bodies. But by then, Papa and I will be on a plane to our next destination. How many people have you killed? I asked. Does it matter? David shrugged. You'll be dead either way. The casual brutality of it was breathtaking. These weren't desperate criminals acting in the heat of the moment. They were cold-blooded killers who'd turned murder into a business model. The car finally stopped in a small clearing surrounded by dense forest. There was no building, no shelter, just a fire pit with ashes that suggested this place had been used before. End of the line, Emma said, turning off the engine. David gestured for Klaus and me to get out. With our hands tied, we had to struggle awkwardly out of the back seat. Emma produced a flashlight and shined it around the clearing, revealing steep rocky slopes on 3 sides. Perfect place for an accident. Bodies would tumble down the rocks and might not be found for months. Sit down by the fire pit, David ordered, waving his gun toward the center of the clearing. We sat on a fallen log that had obviously been positioned there for this purpose. How many other victims had sat on this same log, listening to David and Emma explain how they were going to die? Now then, David said, pulling out a tablet computer. Let's start with your banking information. Account numbers, passwords, security questions. Go to hell, I said. Emma moved behind me, and I felt something sharp prick my neck. Not the syringe, something smaller. A knife, maybe. Let's try again, David said patiently. Bank of America, checking account. What's the account number? The knife pressed deeper into my neck. I felt a warm trickle of blood run down to my collar. I need my phone, I said. The account numbers are saved in my banking app. Emma laughed. Do you think we're stupid? You'll try to call for help. The phone has no signal up here, I pointed out. You can watch everything I do. David considered this, then nodded to Emma. She pulled my phone from her pocket and handed it to me, keeping the knife at my throat. I opened the banking app, letting them see the login screen. Then I deliberately entered the wrong password 3 times in a row. Access denied. Account locked for security, the app announced. Oops, I said. I guess I'm more nervous than I thought. The bank will probably call me in the morning to verify it wasn't fraud. David's face darkened. You did that on purpose. Did I? I'm 56 years old and being held at knife point in the woods. My memory isn't exactly at its sharpest right now. Emma pressed the knife harder against my neck. Try again. I can't. The account is locked for 24 hours. Security protocol. It was true. I'd set up that feature specifically to prevent exactly this kind of situation. If someone tried to force me to access my accounts, the wrong password entries would lock everything down. What about credit cards? David demanded. Same passwords, same security protocols. I shrugged as much as the knife would allow. You're welcome to try, but you'll just lock those accounts too. Klaus had been watching this exchange intently. Now he spoke up. They are lying about the accident, he said quietly. This place, It is too remote. Bodies would not be found here, not for years. They plan to dispose of us completely. Emma's laugh was sharp and bitter. Smart man. Yes, we have a more permanent solution in mind. She gestured toward the dark forest with her free hand. There are abandoned mine shafts all through these mountains. Some of them go down hundreds of feet. David nodded approvingly. Emma does her research. She's found some perfect spots over the years. How many years? Klaus asked. We've been perfecting our technique since 2018, Emma said proudly. 12 successful operations across 6 countries. 12 victims. 12 families who probably still wondered what happened to their loved ones. That's when I heard it. The faint sound of a helicopter in the distance. Klaus heard it too. His posture straightened slightly, and I saw hope flicker in his eyes. But David and Emma were too focused on their victory speech to notice the approaching sound. The beauty of the widow market, David was explaining, is that they're often isolated from family, financially comfortable, and desperate for companionship. Perfect targets. The helicopter was getting closer, but it was still too far away for them to hear over their own voices. What I don't understand, I said, raising my voice slightly to cover the increasing noise, is why you chose me. There must be easier targets than someone who takes German lessons and asks too many questions. Oh, that, Emma laughed. You weren't supposed to be that observant. Usually by the time we get Marks to Germany, they're so infatuated they don't question anything. The helicopter sound was much louder now, but they still didn't seem to notice. Also, David added, your financial profile was irresistible. 2 million in life insurance plus retirement savings? We couldn't pass that up. How did you know about my finances? Emma's grin was pure evil. David didn't just accidentally bump into you at Whole Foods, Maggie. We'd been watching you for weeks. That's when the helicopter searchlight cut through the trees, illuminating our little clearing like a stage. And David and Emma finally realized their perfect plan had just fallen apart. The helicopter searchlight was bright enough to read by, which would have been convenient if I'd brought a book instead of being kidnapped by psychotic con artists. David spun around, his gun swinging wildly between Klaus and me and the aircraft overhead. Emma kept her knife at my throat, but I could feel her hand shaking now. Stay calm, David shouted over the rotor noise. They can't land here. We still have time. Time for what? To kill us faster? The helicopter circled the clearing once, then moved off to look for a landing spot. Through the trees, I could hear vehicles approaching on the logging road, police probably, or search and rescue. Move! Emma yanked me to my feet, the knife nicking my neck again. We're going to the mine shaft. Now! David grabbed Klaus's arm and hauled him upright. With our hands still zip-tied, we had no choice but to stumble after them toward the tree line. The mine shaft turned out to be about 50 yards into the forest, a circular opening in the ground with a wooden frame that had seen better decades. Emma shined her flashlight down into it, revealing nothing but darkness. See how practical this is, she said, sounding almost proud of her research skills. Bodies disappear completely. No evidence, no crime scene, no DNA. You've done this before, Klaus said. It wasn't a question. Only when necessary, David replied. Most of our marks are happy to hand over their money voluntarily, but sometimes we get difficult ones. Like me, apparently. Though to be fair, I'd never been called difficult for refusing to be murdered before. That was a new one. The sounds of the search team were getting closer, dogs barking, men shouting, heavy boots on fallen leaves. Klaus's radio call had definitely gotten through. They'll be here in minutes, I pointed out helpfully. Exactly, Emma said, which is why this needs to happen quickly. She positioned me at the edge of the mine shaft, the knife still at my throat. David did the same with Klaus. I could see the plan. Make it look like we'd fallen in while trying to escape. Tragic accident, no evidence of murder. Any last words? Emma asked, almost politely. Actually, yes, I said. I have a question about your business model. David blinked. Your what now? Your business model. See, I was a financial consultant before I retired, so I'm curious about the economics of your operation. Emma stared at me like I'd lost my mind. Which, given that I was discussing profit margins while standing at the edge of a mine shaft with a knife to my throat, was probably a fair assessment. You kill 12 people in 6 years. That's 2 victims per year, I continued. Even if you average $500,000 per score, that's only $1 million annually. Split between 2 people, Living expenses, travel costs, bribes, equipment. I shook my head. The overhead must be killing your margins. What are you doing? Klaus whispered. Buying time, I whispered back, and satisfying professional curiosity. David was frowning now, apparently unable to resist engaging with my analysis. We don't split it evenly, and some marks are worth much more than 500,000. Like me, presumably. But still, you're looking at maybe 300,000 per person per year, assuming everything goes perfectly. That's not wealthy, that's upper middle class. And you're risking life in prison for it. The search dogs were much closer now, maybe a couple 100 yards away. The point isn't just money, Emma snapped. It's the game, the challenge, the power. Ah, I nodded sagely. So you're not really professional criminals, you're amateur psychologists with a murder hobby. That explains the inefficiency. Inefficiency? David looked genuinely offended. Well, yes. For instance, bringing me to Germany was completely unnecessary. You could have drugged me in Chicago, staged a home invasion, made it look like robbery gone wrong. Much simpler. We like the international aspect, Emma said defensively. It's more sophisticated. It's more complicated. More variables. More things that can go wrong, like tonight. The knife pressed harder against my neck, but Emma was clearly rattled by my critique of their business practices. Enough, David said. Time to go. But before he could push Klaus toward the mine shaft, the forest exploded with noise and light. Police officers with flashlights and weapons emerged from the trees in multiple directions, surrounding our little clearing. Polizei, drop your weapons, hands where we can see them. The commands came in both German and English, which meant they'd brought someone who could handle international incidents. David swung his gun toward the nearest officer, but Klaus chose that moment to throw himself sideways, knocking David off balance. The gun went off, but the shot went wide. Emma's knife hand moved away from my neck as she spun to see what was happening. I threw myself forward, rolling away from the mine shaft and bumping into her legs. She stumbled, and the knife went flying into the darkness. Within seconds, the police had both David and Emma on the ground in handcuffs. Klaus and I were freed from our zip ties and immediately surrounded by paramedics checking our injuries. Are you hurt? One of them asked me in careful English. Just some scratches, I said, touching the cuts on my neck. Nothing serious. A detective approached. A woman in her 40s with intelligent eyes and the kind of presence that suggested she'd dealt with international incidents before. I am Detective Sarah Weber, she said. You are Margaret Sullivan, the American tourist? That's right, and this is Klaus Miller, the forest ranger who tried to help me. We have much to discuss, Detective Weber said. But first, medical attention. Then we talk about what happened here tonight. As the paramedics led me toward the ambulance, I caught sight of David and Emma being loaded into separate police vehicles. David was shouting something about lawyers and diplomatic immunity. Emma just looked defeated. Excuse me, I called to Detective Weber. You'll want to search their apartment in Munich. I think you'll find evidence of other victims. We are already coordinating with Munich police, she assured me. Your daughter provided very detailed information when she contacted the embassy. My daughter. I'd forgotten about the 6 p.m. deadline completely. What time is it? I asked the paramedic. He checked his watch. Nearly midnight. I'd missed Sarah's deadline by 6 hours. She must be worried sick. Can I call her? My daughter? Let her know I'm alive? Of course, Detective Weber said, handing me her phone. Tell her the nightmare is over. As I dialed Sarah's number, I looked back at the mine shaft where I'd almost ended up. David and Emma's sophisticated international operation had lasted exactly 4 months from the time they'd targeted me to their arrest. Not exactly criminal masterminds, despite their delusions of grandeur, but they'd been deadly enough, and if Klaus hadn't found me when he did, things might have ended very differently. The phone rang twice before Sarah answered. Mom? Oh God, Mom! Are you okay? The embassy said there was an incident, and the police were involved, and I've been going crazy. I'm fine, sweetheart, I said, my voice shaking now that the adrenaline was wearing off. I'm safe. It's over. What's over? What happened? I looked around at the police cars, the search and rescue teams, the FBI agents who were apparently now on scene for the international terrorism angle. It's a long story, I said. But the short version is that your mother is a lot tougher than either of us realized. The Munich police station at 3 in the morning was about as cheerful as you'd expect. Fluorescent lights, stale coffee, and the kind of institutional furniture designed by people who'd given up on human comfort decades ago. But after nearly being thrown down a mineshaft, I wasn't complaining about the accommodations. Detective Weber sat across from me in the interview room, reviewing a file that had grown substantially thicker since my rescue. Beside her was Agent Harrison from the American FBI, who'd flown in from Frankfurt as soon as the international implications became clear. "So David Fisher and Emma Richter," Detective Weber said, referring to their real names from the passport records. "You said they mentioned 12 victims in 6 countries?" That's what Emma claimed. She seemed proud of it. Agent Harrison leaned forward. "Mrs. Sullivan, I need to ask you about something we discovered at their Munich apartment. You mentioned sending evidence to your daughter?" "Yes, photos of Emma's passport, audio recordings, some pills they tried to give me. The pills tested positive for rohypnol, date rape drug basically. But there was something else we found that doesn't match what they told you." He opened a laptop and turned it toward me. The screen showed a sophisticated database with photos, personal information, and financial data for what looked like hundreds of people. "This isn't a small operation, Mrs. Sullivan. This is an international network." I stared at the screen, scrolling through page after page of potential victims. Wealthy widows, divorced women, even some wealthy men, all carefully researched and categorized by net worth, family connections, and psychological vulnerabilities. "How many people are involved in this?" I asked. "We're still investigating, but initial analysis suggests at least 30 active participants across 12 countries." David and Emma were just one cell in a much larger organization. The scope of it was staggering. This wasn't 2 criminals working together. This was an international conspiracy that had been targeting vulnerable people for years. "What about the other victims? The 12 people Emma mentioned?" Detective Weber pulled out another file. "We cross-referenced missing persons reports with the locations and dates in their files. We've identified 8 confirmed victims so far. 4 other cases are still under investigation. 8 confirmed murders. Families who'd been wondering what happened to their loved ones for years." "There's something else," Agent Harrison said. "The database shows they'd been planning to target you for over a year." "A year? But I only met David 3 months ago." "They researched you thoroughly before making contact. Your financial situation, your late husband's life insurance, your daily routines, your emotional vulnerabilities after his death. The encounter at Whole Foods wasn't accidental. It was a carefully planned approach. The violation of it was almost worse than the attempted murder. They'd been studying me, learning my weaknesses, planning my death before I even knew they existed." "How did they know so much about my finances?" "Identity theft? Most likely. Someone in their network has access to credit reporting databases, insurance records, maybe even bank systems. We're working with Interpol to trace the digital trail." I thought about the past 3 months with David. All those romantic dinners, the weekend trips, the conversations about my hopes and dreams for the future. It had all been theater, performed for an audience of one, while they planned to murder me for my money. "Mrs. Sullivan," Detective Weber said gently, "I know this is difficult, but we need to know everything you can remember about their conversations, especially anything they said about other operations or other people in their network." I spent the next 2 hours going through every detail I could recall, from David's evasions about his business to Emma's casual mention of their success rate. Agent Harrison recorded everything while Detective Weber took notes. "There was one other thing," I said, remembering something from the car ride. "Emma mentioned that they'd been partners for 8 years, but she looked too young to have been doing this since she was 21. "About that," Agent Harrison said grimly. "Emma Richter's real age is 34, not 29 like her current passport says. She's been using false documents for years." "And David?" "David Fisher doesn't exist. The man you knew as David Fisher is actually Hans Kruger, age 58, with a criminal record going back to the 1990s. Identity fraud, forgery, theft. This is just his latest career move. Everything I thought I knew about David was a lie. Even his name was fake." "The good news," Detective Weber added, "is that your evidence and testimony have given us enough to unravel a significant piece of this network. The data on their computers includes communications with other cells, financial records, even training materials for new recruits." "Training materials?" Manuals on how to research targets, how to build romantic relationships quickly, how to manipulate vulnerable people psychologically. It's quite sophisticated. Agent Harrison showed me another screen, what looked like a professional presentation titled Widow Acquisition and Asset Extraction, Best Practices. I stared at the clinical language describing how to seduce and murder people like me. They teach this to other people? Apparently, it's a lucrative franchise operation. Experienced operators like Hans and Emma train new teams in exchange for a percentage of their earnings. The business model I'd criticized at the mineshaft was actually much more sophisticated than I'd realized. They weren't just killers, they were running a criminal enterprise that scaled by training other killers. How many other people are out there right now targeting someone like me? We don't know yet, Agent Harrison admitted. But we're coordinating with law enforcement in 6 countries to investigate everyone in their database. My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. Landed in Frankfurt. Flying to Munich. Will be there by noon. I showed the message to Detective Weber. My daughter is coming to Germany. Good. You'll need family support during the investigation process. This case will likely take months to fully resolve. Months. I thought about going home to Chicago. Back to my quiet little life where the biggest excitement was choosing between cable news channels. After everything that had happened, it sounded wonderfully boring. Mrs. Sullivan, Agent Harrison said, there's one more thing you should know. Because of your cooperation and the evidence you provided, we've been able to prevent what would have been their next operation. What do you mean? Detective Weber pulled out a photograph, a woman about my age with kind eyes and a gentle smile. This is Patricia Reynolds from Phoenix, Arizona. Hans was planning to make contact with her next week. Patricia looked like she could be my sister. Same demographic, same vulnerabilities, same trusting nature that had made me such an attractive target. Thanks to you, Agent Harrison said. Patricia will never know how close she came to becoming victim number 13. I stared at Patricia's photo, thinking about all the other women like us who'd been saved by tonight's events. Women who'd go to bed safe in their own homes instead of ending up at the bottom of mine shafts. Will you need me to testify? I asked. Almost certainly. Both in Germany and likely in the United States when we extradite the ones we can prosecute domestically. I nodded. Good. I want them to pay for what they've done. But more than that, I wanted to make sure no other widow ever had to run through a dark forest, wondering if she'd survive the night. As Detective Weber walked me to a hotel room the police had arranged, I realized something had fundamentally changed in me over the past few days. The woman who'd boarded that plane to Munich had been looking for romance and adventure. The woman walking through these police station corridors had found something else entirely, her own strength, and a purpose she'd never expected. David and Emma thought they were hunting a vulnerable prey. Instead, they'd awakened something in me that had been sleeping since Tom's death. They'd turned me into someone who fought back. 6 months later, I sat in a federal courthouse in Chicago, watching Hans Kruger, the man I'd known as David Fisher, receive 4 consecutive life sentences without possibility of parole. Emma Richter got the same sentence an hour later. The judge's words echoed through the courtroom. The systematic targeting and murder of vulnerable individuals represents one of the most callous criminal enterprises this court has ever encountered. Sarah squeezed my hand as the bailiffs led them away in chains. Neither David nor Emma looked at me, but that was fine. I had nothing left to say to them anyway. Outside the courthouse, Agent Harrison briefed the media on the final scope of what they'd dubbed Operation Widow's Web. 37 arrests across 12 countries. 15 confirmed murders, with investigations ongoing into dozens more missing persons cases. Mrs. Sullivan's courage and quick thinking, Agent Harrison told the reporters, prevented what would have been many more deaths and led to the dismantling of one of the most sophisticated international criminal networks we've ever encountered. The reporters wanted to interview me, but I declined. Some stories are private, and this was mine to keep. But the story didn't end with the convictions. 3 weeks after the sentencing, I received a letter from Patricia Reynolds, the woman in Phoenix who would have been their next victim. Dear Margaret, she wrote, I can never adequately thank you for saving my life. If you hadn't been brave enough to fight back, I would probably be dead by now, and my family would never have known what happened to me. She included a photo of her grandchildren, 3 beautiful kids who still had their grandmother, because I'd refused to drink that drugged coffee in Munich. That letter was followed by others. Families of previous victims who finally had answers about what happened to their loved ones. Law enforcement officers from around the world who wanted to thank me for my cooperation with the investigation. Most surprising was a letter from the FBI, asking if I'd be interested in consulting on cases involving crimes against seniors. Your experience and insights, the letter read, could help us protect other potential victims and train our agents to recognize these types of operations. Consulting for the FBI wasn't something I'd ever imagined on my retirement bucket list. But then again, neither was being hunted through German forests by murderous con artists, and I'd manage that just fine. I said yes. My first case was a dating app scam targeting divorced women in Florida. My second involved a fake charity operation preying on elderly donors in California. By my third case, I realized I'd found my new purpose in life. The work wasn't easy. It meant constantly confronting the worst of human nature. The predators who see kindness as weakness and vulnerability as opportunity. But it was meaningful in a way my old career had never been. Every scammer we caught, every network we dismantled, meant someone's grandmother or mother or sister would go to bed safe instead of becoming another statistic. Sarah worried about me at first. "Mom, you've been through enough trauma. Why put yourself through more of this?" But she understood when I explained it to her. "I spent 2 years after your father died feeling helpless and invisible. David and Emma saw that vulnerability and thought they could exploit it. They were wrong. The woman they tried to kill in those German mountains was stronger than any of us realized. The question was, what to do with that strength?" A year after the trial, I was invited to speak at a conference for law enforcement professionals about recognizing and preventing elder financial abuse. Standing at that podium, looking out at an audience of FBI agents, police detectives, and prosecutors, I thought about how far I'd traveled from that grocery store in Chicago, where this all began. "The most important thing to understand," I told them, "is that predators count on us being polite, trusting, and embarrassed to ask for help. They count on us being good people who assume others are good people too." I clicked to my next slide, which showed photos of David and Emma being arrested. These criminals spent months studying my weaknesses, my financial situation, my emotional vulnerabilities after my husband's death. They had every advantage: youth, experience, planning, and the element of surprise. Another click, showing crime scene photos from the German forest. But they made one crucial mistake. They assumed that a 56-year-old widow would be too afraid, too confused, or too helpless to fight back. They thought I would go quietly to my death because that's what their research told them about women like me. I paused, meeting the eyes of the law enforcement officers in the audience. They were wrong, and that's what you need to remember when you're working these cases. The victims you're trying to protect aren't helpless. We're not waiting around to be rescued. We're capable of fighting for ourselves if someone just gives us the tools and information we need. The applause was gratifying, but more important were the conversations afterward. Officers sharing stories about cases where elderly victims had fought back, had refused to be easy targets, had turned the tables on their would-be predators. That evening, I called Klaus Müller in Germany. He'd become a friend over the months of correspondence about the case, and we spoke regularly about his recovery from the trauma of that night. "How was the conference?" he asked. "Good. I think we're making progress, slowly but surely." "And how are you, Margaret?" "Really?" I considered the question while looking out the window of my hotel room at the Chicago skyline. Tomorrow I'd fly back to my house, the same house where I'd lived with Tom, where I'd grieved for him, where I'd been lonely and lost and looking for purpose. But I wasn't the same woman who'd left that house to meet David for dinner all those months ago. "I'm better than fine, Klaus. I'm exactly who I was always supposed to be." After I hung up, I opened my laptop and reviewed the case file for my next assignment, a romance scam targeting elderly men in retirement communities across Arizona. The FBI suspected it was connected to the same international network that had spawned David and Emma's operation. Some women my age were settling into quiet retirements, playing bridge and watching grandchildren grow up. And there was nothing wrong with that life. It was peaceful and safe and well-earned. But I'd found something different. I'd found my fight. David and Emma had tried to turn me into their victim. Instead, they'd turned me into their worst nightmare, a survivor who refused to stay quiet, who understood their methods, and who was dedicated to making sure they never hurt anyone else. They thought they were hunting a helpless widow. They'd actually awakened an avenging angel with a consulting contract and a very particular set of skills. And tomorrow, I'd use those skills to save someone else's life. After all, someone had to protect the vulnerable from the predators. And apparently, that someone was me. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.